So I think we should get rolling. We're going to study today looking at how the Reform movement has evolved over time on two issues that I think are really relevant to where we are right now, on Israel, but also on Jewish peoplehood. So that's what we're going to look at today. But first, we'll start with our blessing for Torah study. We say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're going to use a resource that comes to us from the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, where I was certainly privileged to study and do a lot of research. It's a pretty cool place. Anybody ever been to Cincinnati, to the HUC campus? Has anybody ever been?
Nope.
There we go. We've got some. The archives are very, very cool. It's the largest Jewish archive outside of the state of Israel, which is wonderful. So it's a cool place. There's a lot there. And this was put together by them as a way to look at how the Reform movement is and has been evolving. So we are going to look at four main platforms. The first conceived in 1885. Then we're going to look 1937, 1976, all the way to 1999. That's the last time there was a formal platform like this that was created for the Reform movement. And we're going to look at the evolution and see where we've gone, and maybe that's can help us see where we're going. Sometimes it correlates that way, sometimes not so much, but we'll try it out for today. So I wanted to look at this one about the Jewish people. Right, with everything going on in Israel, with everything going on about criticism of Israel, with the rise in anti-Semitism, this feels like a really relevant and important one to me, and I hopefully to someone who's not me, to someone else as well. So let's look at where we stood 1885. Okay, 1885, we're still relatively early in the building of the Reform movement in this country, the building of the Reform movement at all. This is the group who's primarily working on this. It's a lot of German Jewish immigrants is who's involved at this point in time. German Jewish immigrants to the United States were looking to create this intensely American Judaism. When Isaac here, I'm going to stop this for a second so I can look at your faces. When Isaac Mayer Wise founded the Reform movement, he founded our three major institutions. The URJ, Union for Reform Judaism, which then was UAHC, if you remember, when it was UAHC, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. He founded Hebrew Union College, which is my alma mater, and he founded the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which still goes strong today, runs very strong. Arnold, I have to tell you, I just saw Margot, and I said, I was just talking to your Zadie. She goes, my Zadie? I said, so funny.
You realize she thinks you walk on water. I mean, she keeps saying, "Oh, Rabbi Jordy," it's like.
Well, I think she's pretty great as well. She was right outside my window earlier. So if school hadn't just ended, she might have popped up behind me. So we're in the process of creating this intensely American Judaism, right? And it's not a surprise how we get there. Right? We have all these German Jewish immigrants. The message in Germany was you're Jewish or you're German. You're the other. You're Jewish or you're German, but you can't really be German, right? Because you're already Jewish. So they're the perennial other. Coming to America, this is the chance. We are going to be real Americans, real life Americans. And so that is sort of the context in which they're writing and they're thinking and they're building. So let's see how that context influences what they have to say here. Pittsburgh Platform. We recognize in Judaism, a progressive religion, ever striving to be in accord with the postulates of reason. We are convinced of the utmost necessity of preserving the historical identity with our great past. Christianity and Islam being daughter religions of Judaism, we appreciate their mission to aid in the spread of monotheistic and moral truth. We acknowledge that the spirit of broad humanity of our age is our ally in the fulfillment of our mission, and therefore we extend the hand of fellowship to all who cooperate with us in the establishment of the reign of truth and righteousness among men. So what do you think this actually says we stand for? What is this saying? What's actually been said here? Lots of words. Lots of words doesn't mean lots of message. What's been said here?
Truth and righteousness.
Truth and righteousness.
They are acknowledging Judaism as a religion. They're not talking of Judaism as a people or Jews as a people.
They sure aren't. That's an excellent point. Right? Purely, so this is one of the challenges of Judaism, right? Judaism is not just a religion in the way that most religions are. We have so many multiple pieces to it. There's a culture associated that Christianity doesn't have in the same kind of way, right? And Islam also not. I mean, there's Arab culture, but Islam doesn't have the same kind of culture associated either, right? But they're only talking about religion, Judaism as a religion. What kind of religion?
Progressive
Religion.
But one that strives to be in accord with the postulates of reason. So not just do it, reason in doing it, or reason while doing it.
Absolutely.
I think it also says we're like the rest of you, but we just happen to be Jewish.
Right. So look at this one line in here. I don't know if it'll let me highlight. Oh, it does. We acknowledge that the spirit of broad humanity of our age is our ally in the fulfillment of our mission. I think that might be the most interesting line in here. What do you make of that? And therefore we extend the hand of fellowship to all who cooperate with us. What are they saying? Think about where they've been and what are they saying now?
We don't want to isolate ourselves. We want to be part of this country.
We're not the others. We're all part of the American project. We're all in this together, right? It was a song from a really bad Disney Channel movie many years ago. But I can't hear the words, we're all in this together, without the song. We're all in this together, right? We're part of this. We're going to be right side by side in this American project, in the building of America. The spirit of broad humanity is our ally. I don't even know what the spirit of broad humanity means. It's a pretty generic term, but I think the intention is to encapsulate everyone you can possibly pull into feeling included in that statement. You're saying we aren't the enemy. We aren't the other.
That's the key thing. We're not the other. I mean, coming out of Europe, that was always the case.
It's exactly where we were, right? That's how we started today, right? Understanding this context that they're in. Horrible experiences in Europe of being the other. And they're saying, we're not putting up with this. You're German or you're Jewish. We're going to be American Jews and Jewish Americans. And so Judaism is a religion, but we're not prepared in 1885 to acknowledge it as much else. So what happens in 1937? Does someone want to read 1937 for us here?
You make
Bert,
that
you're
up.
unmuted.
Judaism is the soul of which Israel is the body. Living in all parts of the world, Israel has been held together by the ties of a common history and above all by the heritage of faith. Though we recognize in the group loyalty of Jews who have become estranged from our religious tradition by a bond that still unites them with us, we maintain that it is by its religion and for its religion that the Jewish people have lived. The non-Jew who accepts our faith is welcomed as a full member of the Jewish community. In all lands where our people live, they assume and seek to share loyally the full duties and responsibilities of citizenship and to create seeds of Jewish knowledge and religion.
What's changed since 1885?
Thrown Israel into the mix.
Okay, right? We've acknowledged Israel, right? So technically in 1937, we don't have a state of Israel. So Israel is not necessarily state of Israel in this context, right? We're too far out from that. We would have been calling it Palestine at that point, right? So we're talking about Israel as the people is really what I think, right? This Israel is Am Yisrael. I think they're saying Judaism is the religion and Israel is the people, I think. But you're welcome.
Sense.
Thanks. Thanks, Jerry. What else is different? Or what stands out?
We're accepting the non-Jew who wishes to convert as a full member. And those who are estranged, we still feel that we have a tie to Jews who are estranged from religious practice.
Yes.
And we're citizens of the country in which we live, not of Palestine. I like that one.
So
They're beginning to acknowledge, aren't they beginning to acknowledge Judaism as a people? I mean, it's interesting because if you think about it, if you were Irish and 7 generations ago you went to South America, your bond with Ireland has quietly disappeared. Here, they're throwing it back into the mix. We are a people. That's the first time it's being.
Yeah. So I just learned how to highlight. I don't know how I did that. New tools. I don't know. I have this touch bar on the top of my screen that was giving me all kinds of options, and so I pressed them. This line, I think, to me is significant here. That we recognize in the group loyalty of Jews who have become estranged from our religious tradition by a bond that still unites them with us. We maintain that it is by its religion and for its religion that the Jewish people have lived. What are they saying? Let's parse it out, right? That we recognize the in-group loyalty of Jews who've become estranged from our religious tradition. Saying the people who aren't connecting to Judaism as a religion, they're identifying cultural Jews, I think. And people who feel that tie to peoplehood, for whom that's their Judaism, we acknowledge you, and that's okay. And we maintain that it is by religion and for its religion that the Jewish people have lived. Right? We're starting to have more variation, right? So if you're thinking about what existed in Europe for us, in Europe, for the large part, I mean, Reform Judaism was very, very new when they were still in Europe, right? It was just getting off the ground, really hadn't gone very far. So in Europe, you were either Orthodox practicing Jew or you were not. There wasn't as much variation. And so now we're starting to acknowledge that there are ways to feel attached to Judaism and Jewish identity that are not purely in a synagogue sanctuary, right? That look beyond the prayer book in your hands.
I think that pretty much always existed in the people's minds, whether or not it was acknowledged.
So there wasn't, for sure, right? I think that there was something, and there wasn't a lot of, I think it smells. And there wasn't a lot of room to express that. There wasn't a lot of room to express that. And so if you were not an Orthodox practicing Jew, you did your best to sort of blend in as German, right? If you're German or Jewish, and I'm not outwardly Jewish, I'm going to try and look German, right? We've got a lot of accounts of this, late 1800s for sure. Early 1800s as well, right? We're trying to fit in. We don't want to be the peculiar kid on the block. You don't want to be the kid that comes to school with the weird looking food and the weird smelling food, right? We don't want to feel that. And so because there's that tension and there doesn't exist a Judaism that is not orthodoxy, I think there was less room for that. And as they're expanding into America and acknowledging new freedoms, Jewish or otherwise, right? All different kinds of freedoms afforded to you in America, we're starting to recognize that, maybe there are more, it's the Baskin-Robbins thing. Maybe there are more flavors to be had here, right? More flavors of life. Making a little more space. And to me, what I read in 1937 is a little bit of fear about that. I hear some fear, maybe trepidation is a better word, about saying, I'm Jewish. I feel connected to being Jewish, but not connecting to the religion. Why? It's the religion, by its religion and for its religion, that the Jewish people have lived. Anything else in 1937 we want to speak to? Note that as maybe this fear or this concern is coming up, what do they make sure to say? In all lands where our people live, they assume and seek to share loyalty, the full duties and responsibilities of citizenship. What are they saying?
They're saying we're not the other.
We're not the other. We're participating. We're going to follow the rules. We're going to be part of it. Right? That was one of the anti-Semitic tropes of having other loyalties or dual nationalities or any of those pieces, was that we aren't bound. Jews are bound to their own law. They're not bound to the law of the land, which is actually not what the Talmud says, right? But it is an anti-Semitic idea that has been held for many, many, many years.
There was similarly, there were anti-Catholic feelings as well. I mean, Catholics were not accepted, I don't think, in 1937 either.
Yeah.
When John F. Kennedy was running for office, there were concerns that he would be loyal to the Pope. Didn't come up so much with Biden, but I'm sure it was there if you looked hard enough.
Sure. You know, it's funny. I grew up, growing up in Boston, I sort of thought you were Jewish or Catholic. You know, I thought if you were Christian, you were Catholic. That's what I knew, because that was such a huge part of existence. I really didn't know for many years, trying to understand that Catholics weren't, you know, of Christian privilege, right? The Catholics had sort of all of these other pieces weighing on them about the dual loyalties, and, you know, that there were a lot of signs where we were, you know, entry place signs to country clubs or wherever it was no Jews, no Catholics. That's who can't come, right? That we shared far more in there than I had ever realized growing up in Boston. Mel, yeah. You're muted, Mel. Mel, you're muted. I muted you because we had vacuum cleaner noise. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. From the point of view of the UAHC at that time, the only stressor was not how we were vis-a-vis non-Jews. There were also stresses regarding the rest of the Jewish community. And we had to prove to them that we were Jewish. We're still doing that in 2021. There are Jews who don't accept us as Jews. And that was certainly true in 1937. And I think you can get a flavor of that in that text that you showed us.
Absolutely. It's a really great point, Mel. Thank you. Right. So Reform Jews, right? The guys who was Callman, the men writing this aren't just taking issue, aren't just concerned about what's coming from the non-Jewish world. They're getting, you know, shots fired from within the Jewish world who says this isn't legitimate, right? So you're trying to build legitimacy both in the larger American context and within the larger Jewish context. It's a great point, Mel. Thank you. Yeah, Arnold, I see your hand.
What's interesting to me throughout this is that, for example, you'll hear comments like we have a large Greek community, we have a large Italian community. Interesting enough, though, I think nowhere in there do you approach it. The Jewish community is always considered separate because it's a people, just like the Greek are. It takes them a while to eventually disappear, and then it's a Greek origin. Jews, that never happens with. So, you know, the issue is are we a religion or are we a people? And I think that's been debated for the last hundreds of years. For the first time, even in the United States now, I don't think it's really our choice anyway. That's the key.
Absolutely. This is one of the fundamental challenges. I'll put up on the screen. I do an exercise with our confirmation students at the beginning of the year. The first two sessions are, who am I and what is Judaism? Both of those feel pretty fundamental to that experience. And in the what is Judaism session, the way we start is we make a list, a big, long list. I'm seeing if I have mine. Oh, I do. I have it from this year. Here, I'll show you. This is what happens when you don't clean your desk and you never throw anything away. This was our list we started with on my very sparkly clipboard. Here was the list we started with. Really long list. I said anything that's part of Judaism or being Jewish. Anything. So we have everything from, you know, Torah and Temple Sinai to bagels, lox, and cream cheese to friendship bracelets, backpacking, B'nai Mitzvah, Western Wall, Jerusalem, Positivity, Pharaoh, Chala, Manischewitz, L'chaim, 18, Smashing the Glass, Shema, Kibbutz, Masada, and make a huge list. Anything goes. That's the rule. You can put anything on the list. This is what our 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds do. And then the task is to put every one of those items into one of these categories. Where does it fit? What is Judaism? And it's very, very hard. The whole point. Because Judaism has elements of all of these. And while we wouldn't, for many reasons, we don't say Judaism is a race, and yet these are dictionary definitions. Got a lot of tribalism within Judaism.
I have problems with us being referred to as a race, because I think that's what happened, what fueled helped to fuel the fires in Nazi Germany.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons we don't talk about Judaism as a race, because of external pieces that have sort of been layered onto that idea. And we are pretty tribal. We've got a lot of elements of tribal. I keep race on here just because of that, Barb, right? Because that was something that was used to say the Jews are a race. We have to extinguish the race, right? That's why I keep it on here, because it's something that's been used. It's a category Judaism has been put into. And so I think it's a value to sort of talk through. I'll tell you, I've done this activity a number of times because I used to do it before I was with confirmation. Almost none of them put anything into race. They don't go there with it either, but I think it's a value to keep on there. The problem is, how are we going to define Judaism? How do you fit? How do you fit all of those things? How do you fit summer camp and Torah? Where do they all go? This is one of the reasons I think Judaism has long been challenged in many, many different ways, right? Because I think we don't present like any other religion in the world. Not quite in the same way. And I think we are a confusing category, and in a category of our own. And I think it's caused us some problems.
Just a few.
Just like a couple, right? Just a few. I always say, I had this conversation. I had a blood work done a few weeks ago. I'm fine. But the phlebotomist who was taking my blood asked what are you doing the rest of the day? I said, I'm going to do some work. She said, well, what do you do? And Matthew always laughs when this happens. He says, she's going to drop the rabbi bomb. I say, well, I'm actually a rabbi. And then we always wait and see what people say. It's pretty entertaining, because even if you have an awareness of rabbis living in the world, or you have an awareness that women can be rabbis, I'm still not what anybody thinks. And they're very confused. And so she saying to me, what did she say? She said something about, you've got a lot of history. I said, we do. We sure do. And then she starts people, she said to me, do you speak Hebrew? I do. There were a lot of follow-up questions about Hebrew. And then she started talking about like roots of anti-Semitism. And I said, all right, I'll take it. Like, I'm already in this conversation. I'm not particularly in the mood, but here's an opportunity to do this. And so here's how I explain it, as I explained to the phlebotomist. I think that the history of anti-Semitism, we can boil down into one sort of main phenomenon. I think there is a fear of the other, perennial fear, right? Which exists in many different spaces. Jews are not unique to being feared as the other. It's a fear of the other. And so Jews are marginalized, right? We end up in marginalized roles, like being the debt collectors and the bankers, right? That was a lowly role that was given to Jews. And then Jews make a thriving something out of it, right? They built something, and then that's used against them as an anti-Semitic trope. And so I always say the Jews were given lemons, and then the world was pissed when they made lemonade out of it, right? Jews were given lemons, and the rest of the world is indignant that we didn't sit here and say, wow, these lemons, they suck, man. But we've got lemons. Jews made lemonade. How dare they? How dare the Jews make something out of what they've got, right?
That's why they hate Israel.
I think that it plays into a lot of pieces. One of my dad's theories, which I've always held to, was that there was something rattling to the world who watched on and saw such a quick transformation from the Star of David as a yellow star, right, on striped pajamas, to on the side of a fighter jet. That happened very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And watching that transition. Making lemonade. We make really good lemonade. Not always. Right. But what we don't do, what we haven't done through our history, is sit with those sour lemons and say, well, that's what I think the pattern is, as I told the phlebotomist sitting there. Tell anyone who wants to listen, we'll have the conversation.
How much blood did you give? I mean, it usually takes
Very long.
30 seconds and then you're done.
I can do this very, very quickly. I didn't do it particularly quickly today, but I've got.
All right. You had your elevator version.
But I'm a regular blood donor. And I'm giving double reds next week. I'm a universal donor. So they like to take double reds from me because it's a small window, I guess, to give them. You have to be tall enough and weigh enough, but not weigh too much. Okay, great. I fall into it. So that's about an hour usually, maybe a little more. So God only knows what they're in for next time. Stay tuned. Conversations with the rabbi and the phlebotomist. I'll start a blog.
It would be a niche.
Very, very. I love things that are extraordinarily niche. So we've got this challenge, right? That Judaism is presenting differently. And I think what we're seeing is continued discomfort with that. Maybe not discomfort, a struggle with how to frame that and package that for the world. 1976, 40 years later, 39, I'll call it 40. Someone read for us 1976, the centenary perspective. Linda, you unmuted to read last time. Can I call on you this time?
Sure.
Thank you.
The Jewish people and Judaism defy precise definition because both are in the process of becoming Jews by birth or conversion, constitute an uncommon union of faith and peoplehood. Born as Hebrews in the ancient Near East, we are bound together like all ethnic groups by language, land, history, culture, and institutions. But the people of Israel are unique because of their involvement with God and the resulting perception in the human condition. Throughout our long history, our people have been inseparable from their religion with its messianic hope that humanity will be redeemed.
What's happened here? What's changed? They're putting language to what we just said. Defy precise definition. Mm-hmm. Uncommon union of faith and peoplehood.
They're now describing it as a people. It's that's the interesting part. They're now describing it as a people. It's really not a religion anymore. That's an aside. The key thing is we're now a people. Look how many times they mentioned people. We are a people, the Jewish people. So I mean, that's interesting because, I guess it's the only religion that has that, at least to my knowledge.
Yes. I don't know that I'd say they're not acknowledging the religion piece anymore. I think they are, right? That it's uncommon union of faith and peoplehood. I think faith we can substitute for religion here pretty reasonably, right? Inseparable. Our people have been inseparable from their religion. So I think they're trying to uphold two things, right? I say this all the time, to hold out our hands and say two things can be true. We are a religion, we're still a religion, but we're also a peoplehood, and we need to acknowledge this other piece of our existence.
Rabbi, I have a question. Are these statements intended to be additive, or is each one a replacement for the previous? Did I miss that at the beginning?
It's a great question. And I think I might actually say neither so much. I think 1885 is foundational, right? It's the first time the movements come together and said, here's what we stand for. And then every 40-ish years, they're coming back and saying, all right, let's revisit this. Here's what we stand for. I don't think it's meant to, it's not an addendum. And it's not entirely its own thing without the context of what's come before. So in these perspectives, this document that we're actually looking at, this was pieced together by the American Jewish Archives, right? The documents aren't organized by, and here's what we say about the Jewish people, and here's what we say about Israel, and here's what we say about God, and here's what we say about Torah. The archives, Dr. Zola and his team at the archives have done this, right? And parsed this through, just to be clear. So this is one document that's being released, and it's like the State of the Union, right? When the president gives the State of the Union address, it's not necessarily building off the last one that was given. And, well, who knows? And they're not completely divorced from one another, right? Because it's the same person getting up to this in the same capacity. And so I think they're related, but they are not necessarily compounding, if that's a reasonable response there.
You know, as I look at that statement, it's 1976. It's we're in the post-hippie world, and there's a lot of La La Land stuff in that sounds very different than the way the prior two sounded. I think we're trying to be all things to all people at that time.
Yeah, right. There, at some point, this is a challenge to Judaism, right? If we're so hard to define, at some point, and so, we talk about this in the Jewish community, right? We want to make a big open tent. That's the language of the Reform movement currently, right? And we want to expand and make space and make space and make space, which I believe in. And I worry at some point, without any kind of defining perimeter, do we become an amorphous blob without definition, right? If there isn't any clear sort of structure or framework that we operate within, what are we? I think about it often. Yeah, Arnold.
You think that this is a direct contrast, evolution from 1885. In 1885, they were clearly trying to transform Judaism. It's another religion. Therefore, we're Americans first, et cetera, et cetera. It's another religion. We're practicing that. But is it their choice, or is the reality creeping in that, in fact, we're not going to be accepted that way? So we might as well acknowledge that we're a people and build on that.
I think it's both. I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's partly about an acknowledgement of who you are and where you are. I think it started to feel, at some point, started to be clear that this isn't Germany. This isn't Europe, right? Maybe we don't need to be so distinct in our definitions of identity, right? Maybe we don't need such extremely separated categories, right? Maybe we don't need that. But you can see this is reinforced in everything that happens in our movement, right? Look at the evolution of our prayer books. We go from the Union prayer book. Some of us studied this in the prayer class together. We go from the Union prayer book, which is almost all in English. And the these and the thous and the thus and the stuff that I can't get through reading because I just can't follow along. We go from the Union prayer book that opens left to right like an English book, right? Then we end up with Gates. I'm looking at them on my shelf, which doesn't help any of you, but I'm looking at them. Then we go to Gates of Prayer, right? Where we start to have more Hebrew. There starts to be a little more of a traditional liturgy rubric, right? And then we get to what we have now, which is Mishkan Tefillah. That's the blue book, right? If you want to look at where we are now in our prayer, right? And the way we're looking at it compared to where we were in 1885, drastically different time periods. All of this is evolving, partly because I think they're starting to see that maybe I don't need to diminish my Jewishness to be a good American. Maybe I can have it all, right? American mindset. Have your cake and eat it too. And so they start creating that.
And it goes beyond that, Rabbi. You don't need that to be a good Jew.
Yeah.
One can be a good Jew without doing all of the traditional things that some of the ultra-Orthodox do.
There is increasingly, and I think we're still on this trajectory, there is increasingly more room being created. There is more room and more room and more room, more space, more space, more space. Do we eventually run out? Or have we taken up so much space that it's hard to even see all of our space, right? So if you start with a little plot of land, See, this is mine. I can see it all. I know every little inch of it. I know what this is. And then we make more space, right? And your land gets a little bigger. It's harder to tend, right? Harder to keep track of everything. And it gets bigger and it gets bigger. And one of the things I think about, does our land get so big at some point that I can't see to the other side of my property? Because I've made so much space. Can there be too much space?
I think so. I think that the autonomy part of Reform Judaism is a problem. You know, they say, oh, he goes out and reads the New York Times every morning religiously. It's something that you do in a religion to keep the people together. I have the same problem with the changing of the melodies of the prayers, because I don't know if you notice it from up on the bema. Well, we haven't been in the synagogue for a year, but when they come up with a new melody, the clergy are singing it by themselves. But when they go to the old melodies, you have the whole congregation together. And I don't know. I just think there's a familiarity. When we went to the Reformed services in Israel, it's nice to get the same melody that you do back home, because I think that's what held the Jewish people together.
So what's funny is that, because this is like the worst part of being a rabbi, is you can never please anybody on service melodies. It's like the bane of my existence, right? And so what's funny is that, Jerry, part of your experience, Sinai happens to use a lot of Israeli melodies, right? And so part of why you can go to an Israeli Reform congregation and know the melodies is because we use them, right? And at some point they were new, right? At some point they were new and someone had to bring them in, and everyone insists, well, no, I like the old ones, but at some point those old ones were new for someone, right? Debbie Friedman wasn't at Sinai. Debbie Friedman's stuff was new at some point in time, and now there are institutionalized melodies. This is one of the really hard tensions, right? This push and pull of how do we do all these things? And, I think, Jerry, and, in speaking to some of your concern about, the amount of autonomy, I think that the Reform movement I think we lost our way collectively a little bit on that somewhere along the line, because I think the intention and what I try to do and encourage and create is what I think the true intention of Reform Judaism is: informed choice, not reckless choice, right? Informed choice, where there's some rooting and there's understanding. I think that there needs to be room for our practices and the way we do Judaism to evolve, because if it doesn't, we're going to die. It's going to not exist anymore. But that needs to be rooted in something. It can't be without any kind of basis in Jewish history and Jewish thought and Jewish prayer. And, that's why, I spent 5 years learning all those pieces, right? And so people are always surprised. I used to go, I was really involved at APAC through rabbinical school. And so I would be in these multi-denominational rooms of rabbinic students, right? With the yeshiva university guys. And they'd be shocked. So you learn Talmud? Yeah, I learned Talmud, buddy, right? Well, why do you need that? You don't need that. You don't follow it. Doesn't mean we don't need it, right? And it doesn't mean we don't follow it. I don't follow it like you do, right? But it doesn't mean I don't use it as a rooting to make informed choices about practice. And I think that's the differentiation that, for me, it feels the Reform movement lost our way on, that we lost that grounding in understanding from which we can build something different. And now I'll get off my soapbox. Yeah, Barb.
I just, I understand what Jerry's saying is, as far as the tunes, but I love listening to new tunes. I think it shows growth. It shows that we can go in, as Reform Jews, we can go in so many different directions and still have that spirituality. And that's the piece that's really important to me, is is having that spirituality.
I agree with Barb. And I've found it very entertaining, I guess, at a lot of the services during this year. Rabbi Rick and Rabbi Susan have put together little ditties about the COVID thing and pulled that in. And I think that Dan has taken a lot of time to present some programs on Zoom to teach us new songs and new melodies. And I appreciate that from him.
Don't get me wrong, I appreciate it as well on the intellect, but from the neshama, from the inside, it's to me, it's not the same.
And I get that, and I hear that. And one of the things that is our challenge is how we hold that tension, right? How do we meet the needs of Jerry Lasso and, you know, the needs of a young couple who just joined a couple weeks ago, right? I did their wedding. One of them just converted, right? Who really likes some of this newer stuff and connects more so to it. How do we hold all those things to be true at once? And how do we strike a balance that feels as authentic and as reasonable as we can get it? But it's very, very hard.
I think Sinai does it to a great extent, you know, and how they do it, I don't know, but I feel so at home and I so love Sinai. It's just the people and the relationships of the people. I think we have a very unique community here.
I agree with that.
Rabbi, what is the percentage of positive emails you get versus negative? Are people who are happy and thrilled with the services, are they likely to put fingers to keyboard and let you know every Shabbat?
I am always, and I always try and learn from this. And one of the things I've learned is that it is always the right answer to tell someone when they've done something good or when they've had a positive impact on you. It's always the right answer. You should always do it because it's so touching and moving to me. And I hear, it was so funny. We had this program last night. Natalie was on. I don't think Barb, were you on last night?
I missed it.
We had a couple of people who were on last
the
night.
mikvah?
Yeah. We did a program with the new mikvah that's being built here in Denver. And I said, the woman who's running it, she's the president of the mikvah. Her name's Laura. And Laura called me after and she said, did you have the name for this person? Or I forget what you even asked. And I said, people are going to email me. People email me because I hear from people after every single thing I do. After every program, I'll hear a thought from someone from a lunchroom will say, you know, I'm thinking about this, or I have a question about this, or I really like that. Thank you. Right? I will always hear almost after every sermon, after every class. I think that is something sort of special at Sinai. I will tell you that it's definitely not the experience of all my colleagues and not my experience in places pre-Sinai. I think we have a really wonderful, supportive community who does that. But in any given week, I hear a lot of really wonderful, positive things, and I'm very.
That is very heartwarming. Thank you.
It's heartwarming to me too. It's just people are really kind and gracious.
You know, on Tuesday when you did This Week in Torah, I had said to Natalie had missed it, and I said to her, "Boy, you know, Jordy did such a great job today," and she says to me, "You mean like always?"
Oh, I love her. Give her a kiss from me. I swear, I love her. Yeah, Arnold, yeah.
Sure.
Before we run out of time, very interesting observation, which I'll tell you all. As you know, I was raised very Orthodox, Montreal. Okay? There, Zionism is an integral part of Judaism. Maybe in the Hasidic community, it was viewed funny, you know, because Israel kind of existing defied, you know, it shouldn't exist. But from Orthodox down, Zionism was fierce. Other places I've lived for training in the United States, like in Baltimore, same thing. Down in the South, it was my first exposure to Jews, second, third generation, Zionism was not an integral part of that community, which made me kind of very nervous about it. So I made every effort to make sure my kids, I got them to Israel. They went on summer camps to Israel, so they would be Zionist. Coming out here, it's a totally different ballgame. It's such an integral part of at least Temple Sinai that I'm absolutely overwhelmed. Okay, and I think that the regional differences also. I'm not sure if they're denominational or is it regional. Why does this community carry Zionism so much more fiercely than, say, in the South? I don't know if anybody else has lived in the South. I mean, we're talking to the point that if you start bringing up Israeli things, they'll immediately say, well, wait a minute, that's their problem. We're Jews, but yeah, we'll give them some money. But that's not our country in discussion, which I find still amazing. And I agree with Jerry. This is a remarkable congregation here.
I think that there's something to that, and my gut on that, because I've heard this from other colleagues in different ways. Our APAC region, we're the Southwest region, so we're with Texas and Louisiana. We go all the way to there. We're sort of the western edge, and so our representative I chat with regularly about this, and I think that there is a different sense of American patriotism and nationalism in the South, right? And I think that it feels, I wonder if it feels that there's some kind of disloyalty on Israel, or there's some kind of to support Israel, right? Which is unfortunate, because that's the anti-Semitic trope that's been used, right? Is that you have this false loyalty to Israel. You should be loyal to your own country, but you're loyal to Israel instead. And I think the fear of that has maybe held stronger in the South. That's my thought. I want to look at this last piece here. We should always finish out the full suite here. So what I love, and I think we studied, I think we looked at some of these in a different context. I'm not sure when, but visually you can always see a difference to 1999, right? Just looking without reading any of the words, what do you see?
Much bigger.
A lot longer, and Hebrew.
A lot longer and Hebrew. Ding, da, ding, da, ding, right? A lot longer, and there's Hebrew. Think about the Pittsburgh platform in 1885. Can you imagine them putting Hebrew in this? No. I think it's longer because we've gotten more verbose and everything's gotten more complicated as time has gone on. But the Hebrew is really significant. And to me, one of the significant things is the way the Hebrew is done. It's done in Hebrew letters and then in transliteration, right? Making this more accessible to people who might not have the facility with the Hebrew letters. It says, we are Israel, a people aspiring, and we are Israel means something different in 1999 than it did in 1937, right? Founding of Israel, 1948. We are Israel, a people aspiring to holiness, singled out through our ancient covenant and our unique history among the nations to be witnesses to God's presence. We are linked by that covenant and that history to all Jews in every age and place. We are committed to the mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael, love for Jewish people, and to Klal Yisrael, the eternity of the community of Israel, recognizing that Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'Zeh, all Jews are responsible for one another. We reach out to all Jews across ideological and geographical boundaries. We embrace religious and cultural pluralism as an expression of the vitality of Jewish communal life in Israel and the diaspora. We pledge to fulfill Reform Judaism's historic commitment to the complete equality of women and men in Jewish life. We are an inclusive community, opening doors to Jewish life to people of all ages, to varied kinds of families, to all regardless of their sexual orientation, to Gerim, those who have converted to Judaism, and to all individuals and families, including the intermarried, who strive to create a Jewish home. We must not only open doors for those ready to enter our faith, but also to actively encourage those who are seeking a spiritual home to find it in Judaism. We are committed to strengthening the people Israel by supporting individuals and families in the creation of homes rich in Jewish learning and observance, and to making the synagogue central to Jewish communal life so that it may elevate the spiritual, intellectual, and cultural quality of our lives. Yeah, Mel.
That's quite an elevator speech. You know, you're supposed to be able to answer a question or to describe something in a short ride in an elevator. That's going to take forever. Roberta and I had an experience a few years back as part of the American Jewish Committee. We were in a dialogue with the LDS community. And we decided in our initial meetings that each of the groups, the Jews and the LDS, would describe their religion and their foundation. And the LDS went first, and in one meeting, they gave us the background of who they were and where they were coming from. I think we had 10 Jewish people on this conference that we were in. And it took at least 10 weeks for the Jews to try to explain who we were, and we didn't agree amongst each other who we were. This does a pretty good job of trying to get at that, I think.
Yeah, and I think in fairness, I think that, the goal of this was not an elevator pitch, right? I think we also have that challenge, right? We're not good. We don't have a great elevator pitch. We're a little verbose. We're a little too wordy. And I don't know that that was the goal here or the intention, right? We're saying this is what we stand for and this is who we are.
Yeah.
There's also, I'll put it in the chat. There's a book that just came out recently from the Reform movement about the relationship between Jews and LDS. If anyone's interested, I put it in the chat.
There are huge differences between this one and the earlier principles. We're committed to the full equality of men and women. We welcome people regardless of sexual orientation. We welcome the intermarried who want to provide a Jewish home. Those are enormous differences from 1976 or 37.
Well, and in fairness, I think one of the things to note is that 1937, 1976, they weren't even talking about this, right? I think that there's two significant pieces. One, we're now talking about it, the fact that we're talking about it and what we're saying about it, right? I think there's two pieces to this.
Right. It would not have occurred to them.
No.
To write any of this.
Well, I mean, frankly, until now, we've been trying to build from 1885, we've been working to find a place of comfort to say we're a peoplehood, right? I think we get that in 76. And by 99, now we're comfortable and we're prepared to say, this is who that peoplehood is. Who are the Jewish people? Let me tell you who the Jewish people are. This is who we are. But to get there, we first had to say we were comfortable being something that wasn't just a religion. That's where we were in 1885. This is religion only, folks. You got to build to be able to start to say who they are. I mean, I will tell you, 1999, so this is what, 22 years old? I love this piece. I find it really empowering. And I read it and say, I want to be part of that. Right? I want to be part of that. I think it's held. I think it's held for 22 years. I think that there are pieces of this we aren't great at. I think the Reform movement in how we relate to intermarried couples and families, I think we've got a ways to go on that. I don't think we've made good on all of these pieces, but I still think it's what we strive for. I think it's relevant.
Well, you're right. This is aspirational. It may not always be accurate.
This is the commitment we make of what we will work towards. It doesn't mean inherently that we're going to always get there, right? That's not a realistic promise.
And I think very importantly, it is not exclusionary. It tends to be inclusionary and to allow people to express their Judaism in many different ways. There's no right way to do it. There are many ways to get to the same end.
Yeah, and there are multiple ends available, right? There are many ways to get to the same end, and we're not necessarily all going for that one end. There are a couple of different paths you can take, right? It's like a choose your own adventure situation. And I'll tell you, there are many great, great privileges, immense privileges of being a rabbi, and largely centered around the role we get to play in people's lives and be in it with people is an immense privilege. And one of the things that is always so moving for me is when someone feels like for any number of reasons, they don't belong in the Jewish community, they're not good enough, they're not Jewish enough, they're not XYZ enough, and we get to tell them that they are enough. And that is an immensely powerful experience for people and emotional, right? And it's a privilege to get to be part of, but it's a real issue. There are so many who think there isn't space for them. They're not, enough in any way, shape, or in any number of ways. And I think that's a problem that faces us. We need to send more of the message, you are enough. There is space for you. Let's find what that space looks like. And I think that 1999 statement helps ground us in that aspiration. Any other closing thoughts here on this one? We didn't even get to Israel, but peoplehood's a good topic too.
I think you covered it all.
I'll take it. Well, thank you everyone for coming to learn. I think I'm actually with you for Lunch and Learn the next 2 weeks as well. And I take requests. If there are things you want to talk about, let me know. I love when I get a request in email because I think that's wonderful. So if there are things you want to delve into at Lunch and Learn, let me know. We've got the next 2 weeks where I'll be with you, and hope to see everyone's services tomorrow at 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. And onward we go into the summer.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
again.
a lot.